And welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you. It's the Daily Dave. Yet another Daily Dave. You're here. I'm here. Let's take attendance. Dave? Check. Listener? You? Check. Okay, good. We can continue. It's the Daily Dave. 3 reasons that I, Dave, have joined a website called PodMatch. If you've never heard of PodMatch before, it's a kind of like a dating site for podcasters to find guests. Now, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I went there, and I'm going to give them to you right at the beginning. So, if you want to, you can listen to the entire episode, or you can skip right after I give you these 3. Okay? I would love for you to stay, because you and I are friends, so that would make me happy. But, here are the reasons. Number 1, is with the countless episodes I've done for all my shows. Some of them are interview-heavy podcasts where I rely on guests for my podcast. Some of them are guest co-host episodes like these. Dad Space, I have guests on. It's always Living My Side Hustle. I always have guests on there. Living the Next Chapter, I have guests. So what I've been noticing is the first reason I joined PodMatch is sometimes I get ghosted by my guests. Either they sign up to be a guest and they never show up for a pre-chat, which is a good indicator that probably it's a good thing I have a pre-chat. Otherwise, I'd be missing out on episodes. But for example, last week I had pre-chats and interviews with 28 people in a week. 28 in 1 week for my various podcasts. Now, out of those 28, 3 of them were complete no-shows. Either we had a pre-chat and they were coming for the interview, or they were coming for their initial pre-chat and they didn't show up. 3 out of 28. So, I set aside time in my calendar. I create the space. I do all the background work and set everything up for my system to be ready for them. I'm ready to go, and I stay up after working all night into the daytime when I should be sleeping, and I'm sitting here waiting, and they are a no-show. No email, no contact, nothing. Which makes me sad, because, I put a lot of work into my podcast. I hope you can tell as a listener, and I really want to give you the best interviews, the best experience as a listener, and I want you to meet great people. But I can't introduce them to the audience if you don't show up. So, as a podcaster, that's pretty frustrating. And if you're new to podcasting, it'll happen. They just don't show. It could be anything. I, myself, have been a no-show. I did sleep through one pre-interview because, again, my clock was set to PM instead of AM. And I just woke up 2 hours after my pre-chat, and I apologized to the person. They weren't happy with it, but I tried to explain that I'm a night worker and I sleep during the day. Anyways, that was early on, and I have 2 alarm clocks now to get me up during the daytime to go to these pre-chats. So that was me. I was on me. I made a mistake and I missed it. I apologize, but it just never worked out. So I understand if people can't make an appointment because we're humans. But at least, the very least, let your host, if you're being a guest, let your host know that you're not available. It's going to make that relationship even better. So, 28 people, 3 people didn't show up. I still had a great week of pre-interviews. It was awesome. But those 3 I haven't heard back from. Still, it's a week later, and they have the calendar invite just like I do. It's automatic. They have a link just like I do. So something happened. So, I personally don't chase my guests. I made time to be here with you, and if you don't come, then I just mark it as a no-show in Calendly. You can do that, and you should. If you're using Calendly, just mark no-show. That way you can keep track in your notes that I thought I had Bob come on my show. Oh wait, Bob was a no-show. Okay, I can move on. So that's number 1 reason why I went to PodMatch is I want to reduce the number of no-shows. Even with only 3 out of 28, that's still 3 people. That's 3 hours of my time in my calendar that could have been given to somebody else that does show up. You'll find over time that no-shows are really quite a pain as a podcaster. So using PodMatch, we're here with people who want to be on podcasts, and you can kind of pre-screen them before you even meet them. Go to a Facebook group. You can do that as well. Go into these groups and post. But again, that's where my no-shows are coming from, the Facebook groups. So these are strangers I've never met. If you and I have met, most likely you're going to be there for the pre-chat. So that's kind of that first one. The second one is you, as a listener, can give a rating to this podcast, which is kind of you. I appreciate that on all your apps or whatever you're listening to, or on YouTube as well. Thank you. That's great. But as a host, I have no way to give a rating for you as a guest. I want other people to fall in love with you when we have a great mutual experience on my podcast. I want other people to know about you. So as a guest, you can sign up on PodMatch, and I have a link in my show notes. It's my link. I might make a little tiny amount of money for that. But you can be on PodMatch and meet a lot of great people and get out there and share your voice. So yeah, so that's the next thing is I have no way to give a rating for you as a guest. And I want to be able to do that. I want people to know how great you are as a guest, and I want to be able to tell people that you're a 5-star guest and all those things. So it's my opportunity to rate you, to encourage more people to have you on their podcast. So it's my gift back to you, to give you a rating. You don't have to rate and review my show to come on my show. It's nice if you listen. And if you have some nice things to say, great. That's awesome. But it's not mandatory. Some podcasters actually make it mandatory that you send them a screenshot of a 5-star review, and you haven't even been on the podcast yet. So that's I don't like that. I don't like giving my guests a hurdle to climb over. That's why I have a pre-chat. I guess that's kind of a hurdle, but it's a nice mutual hurdle that we both have to work on together. So that was number 1, was just the fact that I'm getting no shows. Number 2 is I want to rate my guest. And number 3 is I'm looking for ways to promote my podcast and putting some money behind advertising. Now, I'm like, Dave, really? I'm like, yeah, I would like more listeners to the show, then we can help more people. That's the goal for this show and my other 7 shows, all 8 of my podcasts. I would love to get more listeners. So I could go and buy ads. I can go give money to another podcaster and have them do an ad for my show. That's an option. Maybe $25. And put an ad for me in my one episode. Thank you. Here's $25. Great. I can do that. But what if I use PodMatch as a way to advertise my podcast? So I'm just doing the single subscription. So it's like less than $10 a month. And I get to meet people and talk about my show and have people come on. Let's go back in history. Remember, every person you interview is a potential listener to your podcast. So the more interviews you do, the more listeners you can potentially get just by simply having guests on your podcast. There's other gurus who are going to tell you that interviewing is a terrible waste of your time and you should do less interviews and more solo. That's fine. If that's the way you want to go, that's great. But I would much rather have more listeners. And if I can meet potential new listeners, and last week I met 25 of the 28 that signed up. So they are all listening to my podcast now, whether it's one episode or many. I just got 28 new listeners by simply being a podcast host. Grow your audience, grow your listenership by having guests. And say, before you come on the episode, thank you for the pre-chat. Head over to the podcast and listen to an episode. You kind of get a feel of how I do my show. So it's a great way to get listens. So instead of putting my money on something that might bring me a listener, I'm using PodMatch as a way to advertise myself, my shows, me. I would love to be a guest on podcast as well. Even as a podcaster, I love talking podcasting, and I love talking about being a dad and my side hustle and my music. There's so many things I can talk about. So if I can be on shows, it's also fun for me. And you get to hear a different side of me that I don't usually share because I'm not asked questions. I'm the one asking all the questions. So I'm using it as an advertisement arm of my podcast. So there you go. So I'm going to cut down on my no-shows to those 3 people who still haven't replied. Where did you go? I have no idea where you went. And then again, I want to be able to give a rating to my guests so that I can encourage more podcasters to have you on their show. I'd love to connect other podcasters to you. You're amazing. So come on my show and let me give you a rating. I'd love to do that for you and so more people can find out about you. My challenge right now is I got to go through PodMatch and cross-reference all the people on PodMatch, now that I'm a new user, to all my backlog of all my old past episodes. That's going to take a while to go through and do all that. So that's fun. And then the last one, again, is just it's an advertising arm of my podcast. For less than $10 a month, I'm now in front of new listeners just by simply being on PodMatch. So again, if you want to try PodMatch, there's a link in the show notes, and that's my affiliate link. Affiliate income is a great way to make passive, small amounts of money. It's not going to pay for your car payment, but it might buy you a coffee. Oh, speaking of buy me a coffee, I have a buy me a coffee as well. See what I did there? Yeah, that's called a segue, everyone. Congratulations. So all those links will be in my show notes as always. Thank you for being here, part of the How to Podcast series. And that's me. I'm on PodMatch. So if you're on PodMatch, let's connect. Let's meet virtually on PodMatch. And I'd love to connect with you. If you're not on there, why are you not? Come on. Get with all the cool kids. Come join us over on PodMatch. All the information's in the show notes as always. Thank you for listening. We'll talk soon. Thanks for being here for the How to Podcast series, the Daily Dave. Catch you on the next episode. Keep podcasting, everyone.